Jimmy Thang from Maximum PC here at CES 2015. I'm here speaking with Nate Mitchell, one of the co-founders of Oculus. And Nate, for those that have been living under a rock for the past two years, can you tell us a little bit about Oculus VR?
Yeah, absolutely. So Oculus is a company dedicated to bringing consumer VR to life, great consumer VR to life. We're focused on two products right now, Gear VR on the mobile side, which is a product we just launched with Samsung, Gear VR Innovator Edition, which is all about sort of convenience, portability. I actually have one right here. Sort of VR anywhere, really high quality VR experience anywhere. And then the Oculus Rift, which we launched the Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift dev kit back in August 2012. And since then we've been working on different iterations of the hardware. We debuted Crystal Cove, there was DK2. We now are showing here at CES 2015 Crescent Bay for the first time publicly. And all of this is sort of leading up to the consumer launch of the Oculus Rift.
Okay, and when can we have to ask, when can we expect to see that?
No release date at this time, unfortunately. It's the question we always get. We're on a good track though.
Okay, I feel like I could just talk to you forever. I mean, so you guys started with on Kickstarter, project on Kickstarter. Yeah. There was some controversy when you guys got bought out by Facebook.
There was some controversy.
Do you think a lot of that has sort of is that sort of hatred gone now, or?
I think the hatred. I think a lot of the initial anger has subsided, but I think that people are still. I was actually just reading some comments on the web today about some of the the interviews and announcements we've made here, and people are still skeptical of Facebook, let's say, and skeptical of the relationship between Oculus and Facebook. I think a lot of that initial gut reaction, again, has gone away, but people are still skeptical that Facebook isn't going to sort of poison Oculus. Now, all that said, I think in the last almost a year it's been since we announced the acquisition, things have gone incredibly well. And I think people would be hard-pressed to point to anything that Facebook or Oculus has done that has been different from our original mission. We open source DK1, SDKs stayed largely open source. We've ramped the team way faster than we would have been able to otherwise. We've been able to do two products simultaneously. We're recruiting the best team in the world: Carmack, Abrash, Brendan O'Reeve, Michael Antonoff. I mean, it's an incredible group. And yeah, I think the onus has always been on us to prove that it was the right decision. But when we looked at whether it was the right decision for us, we really framed it against one question, and that was what is the best thing for VR? How do we get consumer VR to change the world? And joining forces with Facebook just seemed like the obvious way to do that.
Okay, and what do you have to say about some of the naysayers that say, oh, we're going to see the misuse of ads all over the place in VR? That's kind of like the last thing you want to see. I mean.
To the naysayers, I say not much, because I really do think actions speak louder than words. And I think that we will prove them wrong over time, and it is totally fair for them to be skeptical. They should be in the meantime, and we're going to come through in the end. So.
Okay. I think I read a while back that Mark Zuckerberg said for VR to be meaningful, he was hoping to sell it to I think it was 50 million people or something like that. Don't quote me on that number. But it was something quite lofty. What do you think about that?
I think VR is going to be meaningful and impactful way before 50 million units are out there. But I think 50 million units will come faster than people expect, especially when you have so many different players coming out, whether it's Sony, or we saw some announcements by Razer today getting into the VR space. There's been rumors about Google and Microsoft. I think we're seeing all these major players dive in, and VR is taking off as a platform and as a medium. And as soon as there are a significant number of units out there, developers can build content and build successful businesses against virtual reality. And that's really sort of one of the key inflection points that we're waiting for. After that, I do think VR is just going to continue to take off. 50 million units is
very ambitious.
Is an ambitious number. I think they don't all have to be riffs for VR to really fundamentally change the way we live, if that makes sense.
Sure, and it's sort of you're seeing other players jump into the VR market. Like you said, Razer and Sony, and I suspect Microsoft and whatnot. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, because it's that's going to progress VR forward. But are you worried that some of those experiences might sour VR for some people?
Definitely, 100%. So I think I think what we've seen, you know, we're talking about the major players, but in the last year, we've seen dozens of VR companies launch for peripherals for the Rift, for VR headsets that compete with the Rift, for VR headsets that compete with Gear VR, and what we've said from the start is that having all these companies go into this space is awesome, because it really does mean more units sold, which means a bigger audience, which means more content. And at the end of the day, if the VR ecosystem can really take off and thrive, it's going to be awesome for users and developers alike. All that said, we're also seeing people just rush into the space without a real grasp or understanding of how VR works or how it needs to work to really be successful, at least not aligned with how we believe VR needs to work. And I do think that that is causing a lot of thrash, because people go, they pick up a device that's relatively low quality by a team that maybe doesn't know exactly what they're doing, and it really sours the experience, and they're like, oh my, VR's not ready. Like, forget that Oculus thing. They never even try the Oculus thing. They just say, VR's not ready. And in Oculus, we really do have, you know, almost 250 people of the best minds in, you know, software and hardware and design across the board, dedicated to delivering VR every single day. And, you know, I do think we're the best team in the world to pull this thing off.
On the flip side of that, you know, we cover, you know, VR stories a lot at Maximum PC, and some of our readers who haven't had the opportunity to try out any VR headsets, you know, they say in the comments, like, we've been hearing about this for a while, it's not coming out, there's no release date, it's vaporware. You know, what do you have to say to those guys?
I think you just have to see it to understand it. I think anyone who's seen the Rift, especially Crescent Bay, knows that it's not vaporware. Obviously, not many people have had a chance, because this is the first public debut here at CES. But if you've seen DK1, DK2, I mean, we've shipped over 125,000 units to date, development kits. So those are all out there in the wild with developers and enthusiasts. Gear VR, it just launched, it's sold out. You know, we have Crescent Bay here at the show. You try it, and you understand what this whole thing is about. But until you try VR, and I think for some people, you know, you try DK1 and it's this taste of VR, but it's like, that's not going to work. We've got a long way to go. You try Crescent Bay, and it's a fundamentally different experience, and you get it. You can suddenly, you don't have to extrapolate so far. You understand why VR is going to be so impactful and why it's just around the corner rather than far out. So I would say to them, stay skeptical, but when you have the opportunity, go see it, and you will understand why this is so important, especially for games.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about the technical specs of it? Are you guys targeting a 2560 by 1440 resolution?
We don't, or we aren't talking about the display in Crescent Bay.
Okay, not even the refresh rate or anything like that?
We are talking about the refresh rate. The refresh rate is 90 hertz.
Okay.
We don't generally like people to get too hung up on the specs, because VR tends to be the super integrated system where all the different components matter. So what we talk about generally is like positional tracking and low persistence and ultra low latency head tracking and the tracking volume and 360-degree tracking and all of these things, but they're not necessarily like, hey, we're running the display at X resolution or something else like that. And I think, again, it's one of those things where if you're I'm a big software and hardware geek myself. If you are someone who likes Maximum PC, for example, you are probably deep into the spec sheet race, but when you try VR, you'll see it's really about the entire experience being awesome, and no one knob is fundamentally going to change that.
Okay. It's kind of interesting that you're okay with talking about the refresh rate, but not the resolution. Do you feel like that's a more important aspect to emphasize?
The only reason we talk about the refresh rate is because of low persistence. So low persistence is a technique where we actually drive the display at an extremely high refresh rate and blink the backlight pretty frequently. So basically, rather than the display being written and then staying static and then being written again and then staying static, we're actually able to decrease the overall latency of the system by driving it much faster and turning it off. So we write the display, show it, turn it off. Write the display, show it, turn it off. And we do that much faster, which means that it's right much more of the time, right? Instead of right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong, it's right. So that technique requires a frame rate higher than roughly 60 hertz at the bare minimum, or else the user perceives flicker, right? Because your eyes can see that we're turning the screen on and off.
Sure.
So you have to drive it even faster and faster and faster until the human eye can't perceive it anymore. At 60 hertz, some people are going to perceive flicker no matter what. In DK2, it's 76 hertz. Still, some people will perceive flicker, especially in the periphery. But at 90 hertz, people really can't perceive any flicker. It's a lot more comfortable in the eyes, and it eliminates a lot of the motion blur. So that's been a really key feature in terms of delivering comfort and presence. And yeah, so that's why we talk about 90 hertz, because that's a really key aspect of that.
So can we expect the actual consumer release to be 90 hertz as well?
You can expect it to be at least 90 hertz, if not higher, which is, interestingly enough, a big challenge on the PC side. Just, maximum PC. You are going to need a pretty hefty GPU to drive this.
Yeah, no kidding.
When
you
think about, even at 1080p, a 90 hertz display, when you're rendering stereo, that's really heavy processing power that most modern games today aren't even designed to run at. So, for the big PC fans out there, you're in luck. You're going to need a great rig to power the Rift. And over time, we do want to bring that to lower-end hardware, but to really get the quality of experience and fidelity that we want to deliver, especially for V1, it is going to be a high-end card. And the machines that we're using today for the Crescent Bay demos, they're running on NVIDIA 980s. So very high-end cards even today.
Gotcha. And we have DK1 at the office and DK2 as well. I just tried out the Crescent Bay today. It seems like you guys are making a lot of improvements, obviously, especially in the realm of like the motion sickness. How are you guys overcoming that? Is it the refresh rate?
That's a big question.
Okay.
So
that's the moving pieces to that one.
It goes back to it being an integrated experience. Motion sickness. Well, there's two parts to it. One is the system itself, and the other is content, right? So let's pretend we have a VR system that is perfect in every way, shape, or form and can simulate reality perfectly. If then you have a piece of content where, let's pretend you're on like a merry-go-round going hundreds of miles an hour, you're going to get dizzy. Just like you would in real life, the game will simulate that extremely well, the system will simulate that well, and you'll actually feel disoriented.
Except your body is not going to be moving, so that's going to feel maybe even more disorienting in some ways?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely. That disconnect between what you're seeing, the optical flow, the vection, and your vestibular system is just going to cause problems. So the content's always a challenge, and we're working with developers. We have a best practices guide, but really it comes down to what developers want to create and what users want to consume. On the hardware side, we've dedicated a huge amount of research and time and energy to nailing it, the system down so that everyone can have a comfortable experience. It's a mix of ergonomics, resolution, the optics, distortion, positional tracking is required. We think low persistence is required. 360-degree tracking is also really important, depending on the types of experiences you want to create. So there is and minimizing latency, which is something that we don't talk about that much anymore, but having a sub 20 millisecond latency experience is really important, I think, at least, not only to presence, but to comfort. Because if you're moving your head and the screen's dragging behind you, you're going to feel dizzy. You basically want to absolutely minimize any time between any movement or motion or input you make and that image, the updated image being reflected on the screen. So we've dedicated a huge amount of time and energy to nailing that with the Rift, and I think that's one of the one of the big problems that when you go try another headset, regardless of sort of the content you're trying, oftentimes it does make you dizzy because VR is this house of cards, and when everything's right, it is truly magic, both in terms of feeling like you've been teleported somewhere else and also that level of comfort you can achieve. But you pull out one of those cards and the whole thing comes crashing down. And most groups don't have all those pieces in place quite yet. So I think we're really proud of what we've pulled off.
You think you've solved the issue, or know how to solve it?
I think we've solved the issue in terms of delivering a piece of hardware and software sort of core system that can deliver comfort for everyone. And 95%, 99% of the people that go through the Crescent Bay demo feel great. Okay. I think that's the threshold we needed to cross before we were ready to come to the consumer market. Gear VR, still a mixed bag, and that's why it's partially an innovator edition. Trying to get it out there, learn, and get feedback from both developers and enthusiasts.
Gotcha. Going back to the Crescent Bay demo, you guys showed it off at the Oculus Connect event, and again here it's a standing demo, and for a long time you guys have said that it's Oculus VR is a seated experience. So why stick with the standing demo?
The demo, the Crescent Bay demos are really designed to demonstrate how powerful presence can be. And just like audio is a force multiplier for presence, or it really amplifies the sense of presence you get, standing does as well. And I actually don't know all the psychological or physiological details behind that. I assume mostly it's just because you're more, you're less sort of grounded in reality, right? When you feel yourself in this seat, you know you're totally safe. When you stand up, then you're a bit more free.
You can literally fall down.
You can literally fall down, and so there's less grounding you to the real world, and your brain is a little bit more, it freely transitions to believing that I'm standing, you know, on the edge of this mountainside and I'm about to fall off. And when that happens, you've crossed the threshold. You've really teleported there, and you feel like it's someplace entirely new and special. So, yeah.
So I mean, like, why? I mean, can we see a version in which you guys would support the standing experience?
I think users are going to do
whatever they want.
We want to nail the sitting down experience, even though it has less presence, because it's complicated enough to nail the sitting down experience, and from a very practical standpoint, it's you know, dangerous for people to get up, put this thing on, basically be blind, but not only be blind, think that they're in another world, and then be crashing around their apartment or home. So we really want to focus on nailing, you know, you sit down in front of a computer, you have a camera, you're comfortable, you're grounded, and then you can jump into any experience in VR and get that right before we have people, you know, running around on treadmills or something like that. It's just too early.
So, you know, I've talked to some other developers, and they feel like, aside from maybe the liability issues and stuff like that, it could come down to a technical limitation, and that you guys are relying on a camera, external camera. For instance, I talked to Sixth Sense. They're making a controller for the VR, and they're using like sort of a gyroscope that they mount on the headset itself, that allows you to sort of walk almost anywhere within, you know, 100 feet or whatever.
Right.
What do you think about that solution? And would Oculus ever consider something like that?
Our reasoning is less of a technical limitation and more of, you can only tackle so many things at once, and making it a standing experience as a staple or as by default really does complicate the sort of experiences you can build. The safety, the tracking volume, for example, of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the precision, the distance, and everything else. And frankly, there aren't, you know, we saw with like Kinect and Wii, for example, there aren't many houses and homes with enough space for a wide tracking area where you're going to be walking around. It's just actually not that practical. And so by starting with something where you're seated in front of a computer, which is something that almost every, you know, household has these days, we really do think that's the best place to start. And we'll build from there, and we'll see where it goes, and we'll see what users do as well.
Yeah, I guess one issue from using a camera system is, like on the DK2, for instance, I was playing Assetto Corsa racing game, and I had a Logitech steering wheel, and, you know, like there are certain points where the steering wheel actually interferes with the camera, and so I mean, like, what do you have to say about those issues?
I would have to see exactly the camera and your setup and all that stuff.
Okay.
There's always going to be situations, but I assume if your steering wheel's here and your head is here, then the camera should never be obscured, unless you had the camera. Well, it depends on your setup. I guess if you were like laying down in some sort of car or something like that.
I sleep in a car myself.
So you know, with the Crescent Bay camera, we've improved the tracking volume and given it more space. I think there's always going to be challenges in terms of the setup, regardless of the technique that we use. There will always be some, you know, edge case that's not well supported. We're going to do our best to sort those out as we go, and obviously we want to support all the different types of games and experiences. We'll keep working on it. Speaking
of games and experiences, I feel like right now we're seeing a lot of demos and stuff like that. Not too many in-depth experiences or any meaningful AAA games. Are you guys doing anything to sort of to combat that?
Yeah, I think.
Actually, can I interrupt? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Just for a second. You can
Sure.
ask that question again.
Okay.
No, it's good. Let's send it. Thank you.
Cool.
Sorry.
So I would argue that there are some great AAA games coming. That,
Okay.
you know, one of the things that people have keep coming in here today telling me they use the DK2 every day to like play Elite Dangerous, for example, or Assetto Corsa, or any of the other, you know, experiences that are out there that maybe are still early access or still in development, but really demonstrate how good the VR experience can be. I think that we are developing content internally. We're funding content. Jason Rubin is on board as our head of studios. We're publishing a number of different titles and working with different partners on bringing their content to VR. The magic is really when someone develops a game from the ground up for VR. Mm-hmm. And the catch-22 problem with that is if you develop a game for VR today, there's no audience to sell into, right? You've got 125 development kits for the Rift out there. That's not enough money if we start a game company and build a game to recoup our investment. And so what you need is a bigger audience so that developers can sell their content.
Sure, it's sort of a chicken and egg situation.
Exactly. So I think what we need to do and what we continue to do is seed the market, help developers de-risk by helping fund or publishing content in a lot of different ways. Developers have different needs, whether it's funding or marketing support or just support, figuring out how VR works. But we're really committed to cracking the code there. And the other big thing that we talked about before is that the more players that are in the space, the more units that are out there, and that means more successful developers building more great games. It is going to take a while for us to get to really, a vast array of high-quality AAA titles for VR. That's okay. That's the reality of the situation. We barely know the grammar and language around designing VR games, and so it's going to take us a while to figure out what works, what doesn't, and it's going to be a fun time to experiment and live on the cutting edge with game developers as they figure it out.
Okay. Speaking of which, do you even know what the best way to control VR is or to play VR? I know you guys recently acquired Nimble VR.
Yeah.
I had a chance to talk to them. It's sort of a Leap Motion kind of experience where you mount the camera on the headset itself and you can see your hands and things like that. Then, as I mentioned before, there's Sixth Sense with sort of that Razer Hydra experience. Is that what is the best experience? How do you best? Is there a universal thing, or is there going to be multiple controllers?
It's a tough question.
I feel like it's sort of like the Wild West. I'm confident the headset and all that stuff is going to be there, but the controller is the big question. And I think nobody, as far as I know, maybe you guys know internally, there isn't really a silver bullet solution quite yet.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has cracked the code quite yet. And I think that's something we've been saying for a long time. Part of that's because no one had a reason to develop an input device truly designed for VR until now, right? With the Rift and the Morpheus and some of these devices coming online, all of a sudden it's wow, we need a great VR input. What is it? I've talked to a lot of different people today. Everyone has different ideas. Wands, gloves. You want not only input, but you want output. You want haptics,
Sure.
and be able to feel the things that you're interacting with in the world. Some people want just optically tracked hands, naked. There's different advantages and disadvantages to each, and it's input something that we've been researching and investigating really heavily, trying to get something where we feel like it's going to deliver a great VR experience for everyone and enable a lot of different types of unique VR content. It's a really hard challenge. We really don't have any major announcements to make right now, but I do think that there's a lot of hope in that space for great things to come, and we'll continue to share our progress as we go.
Cool. All right. Do you have anything else you wanted to tell our readers?
No. Thank you, guys. I hope you guys have a chance to try it soon.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the in-depth interview.
Yeah, my pleasure.